Hello and welcome to the Freedom Anarchist News Review. With me tonight I have John. Hello, John.
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm quite looking forward to the Christmas
Oh
break.
yeah,
It's been quite a busy period,
lovely.
um, which is this being our last of the year. So
Mm,
thank you very much for showing up for it. I hope you're
that's-
also doing reasonably well.
yeah, struggling, but okay.
Isn't that the case for everyone
Yeah,
these
same
days?
for me. Yeah.
Um, so tonight we have updates on the Spycop inquiry because we have had Alison finally giving her evidence as someone who was strung along by Mark Jenner, previously known as Mark Cassidy, um, during his stint in 1995 to 2000 or so. Uh, and he was obviously one of the worst of the many spy cops who started relationships with people under false pretenses and at the time was married with kids. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Uh, the headline story of the night: the UK is pressing to undercut the ECHR, along with 27 of the 46 Council of Europe members, uh, including Hungary and Italy. The UK has signed an unofficial statement that urges a new framework for the European Convention of Human Rights that will narrow the definition of inhuman, human, and degrading treatment. Always a encouraging thing to hear. We will follow that up with Shelter, warning that more than 1 in 20 people are now homeless in parts of London, part of a near 400,000 strong population of known homeless people, and that being an important word. Um, we will then finish off with talking about the camping that's been going on, what that was going on in Germany, and a new analysis has come out of the problems that happened around the Rhinemetall Ontwaffnen protest camp. I do apologise for my pronunciation. Um, and the protests in Bulgaria, which sort of round us off with a bit more of a positive story of protests going right. We have a very brief Filton update from Andy in absentia as well. So starting off with the updates on the Spycops inquiry. Now,
Mm,
obviously, you have uh, given your background with sort of looking at class war and such. I suppose
mm.
you have a specific take on that kind of era around
Mm.
around the late 90s.
Yeah, well, that was before I was involved with class war, but it's something that was kind of kicking around in the background when I started getting involved with class war in 2013, because I think there was already quite an inkling of the fact that that group could have been spied on. And were we already finding out about spy cops in 2013? It seems around about that time. But I remember actually
Yes,
one of the
really?
first meetings I went to, meeting up with class war people, someone I'd never met before came up to me and said, "Okay, well, you've told us who you are, but who are you really?" So there's this kind of suspicion, and I'd been open that I used to work in the Home Office, so I thought I'm not going to keep that secret. If people think, well, he's in the Home Office, therefore he's a risk, I'd rather them know from me rather than find out later and think, why is he kept this hidden? But yeah, there's always suspicion. Interestingly enough, during the Spy Cops stuff, either earlier this year or last year, some officer's name came to the attention of people in class war. And I just got in touch with people and said, does anybody remember this person? And nobody involved with class war at the time had any clue who this person was. But apparently he was involved with class war activities and, presumably driving a van and getting people to places and was incredibly useful and so on. Someone else told me that often it was quite obvious when someone was a cop, in that they'd be incredibly helpful. And um,
Very
and so
common, yeah.
someone told me that Class War had a strategy where they would basically send them on errands up and down the country in their van, delivering papers to Yorkshire or whatever, just to get them out of London on a day that Class War was actually doing something and things like that. So I know about some of that kind of activity from people who have told me about those times. But I mean, the spy cop stuff that is coming out in this incredibly long inquiry and incredibly badly run inquiry is just awful, and I find it. I find it just I can't imagine what those women have been through. I mean, it's just uh, I mean, it's sad and you get angry and there's all and that's just me thinking about it from afar. You know, I can't imagine the lives that it has, turned upside down. It is just awful.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that should be said is it's been incredibly impressive, actually, how well the
Mm,
campaign to expose all this stuff has
mm,
put its work together. You know, like I
yeah,
think there should be a great deal of um, thanks and general praise for Police Spies Out of Lives, the
mm,
campaign opposing police surveillance, and
yeah,
that sort of milieu around the Spycops investigative teams. Tom Fowler has been doing some really great
yeah.
reportage on it,
On a daily
and
basis.
yeah, as evidenced as well by the
Yeah,
fact that he's been kind of repeatedly
yeah,
um, slapped on the wrist
mm,
by the Inquirer itself for being
yeah.
too good at his job, perhaps. Um,
Well, that's complex as well, isn't it? Because they've set up so many rules on what's allowed to be said and what's not. It's hardly surprising that if you're trying to kind of report on as live a basis as possible, that you occasionally slip up. I mean, I saw some posts by him about that. Um, and I can understand how difficult it is to stay on the right tracks, but it's kind of Kafkaesque, isn't it? The way that they've put all of these restrictions in place, and so much of it is private for a public inquiry. I mean, it's just
And in
astonishing.
many cases, details which have been in the press because the
Yeah.
women effective have extremely bravely
Mm,
gone on the record and said, "No,
mm,
this is what happened to me,"
yeah.
and then the the inquiry itself turns around and starts
Mm,
waffling on about protecting identities. You're like,
yeah. Well, I mean, the
at this stage,
dignity
it's
of the
just
people involved.
ludicrous.
The dignity of the victims is amazing, and the lack of dignity amongst some of the police officers is astonishing, but not
Yeah,
surprising as
and
well.
yeah, it's I think. So this week, obviously, Alison's been giving her testimony, and the difference is incredibly stark. You're right, where she's, I- and in many cases they've had to go through this stuff again and again and again just to kind of drive home the point
Mm,
and get the facts out there and actually have them listened to.
yeah.
Um, and all this for, I think it's by far the most important thing about the inquiry,
Mm,
which, again and again has tended to show itself as wanting with all its heart to whitewash the situation to one
mm.
degree or another, um,
Yeah,
has just been dragged back to
yeah.
actually exposing these people.
I was just thinking about that because we've had so many public inquiries over the last, let's say, the last 20 years, maybe starting with the war in Iraq and the various inquiries that went into that. And we've had so many scandals regarding things like MPs' expenses and the Panama Papers and inquiries into the post office stuff and Grenfell, and it's just we seem to have, obviously we've got like a world where there's permanent crisis, but in this country we have permanent inquiries, don't we really, to deal with all of the what would be called in other countries corruption,
Mm.
but in this
I
country
mean,
we don't use
it's
that word.
without sort of being
We're
too forward
British.
about it, there is a strong argument that inquiries in this country are there specifically
Yeah.
to uh, sort of bat away um, true justice. In many cases, like the Hillsborough is a very famous
Oh
example,
yeah.
or Grieve is another, where they make it take so long that
Mm,
people have quite literally died of old age before they
yeah.
see any justice, and certainly before they see any money, which is obviously what
Mm.
the government is often very um, key on.
Yeah, and the other side to that, of course, is that the perpetrators are often retired or dead as well, and can't be punished in their roles at the time, and that sort of thing, which
Yeah,
is
everyone's long since retired, too old and too frail to go to jail now,
yeah,
etc., etc.
yeah, indeed.
Justice for some, but not for all.
I wonder whether we are living through a period where there are more inquiries than others. It just feels like we are, or it feels like we've just got many more of them than previous generations. Am I off track?
There's definitely a tendency. So you know uh, come on, brain, the Bradford case,
Yeah.
where they've had one inquiry already, which came to a
Mm,
conclusion, and they're now doing another inquiry
yeah.
because the first inquiry wasn't good enough, apparently.
Mm, mm,
Um, and I think there is more of a knee-jerk response from prime ministers in
mm.
particular now to resort to another inquiry because it's just a handy way of putting off the day of reckoning until someone else's premiership.
Yes.
Um,
Like nice little present for the next person who gets the job.
oh, quite, yeah.
Yeah.
But also, I think there's a bunch of stuff which happened in the 80s and 90s where comment from Rich. There've been so many they'll start to turn up in geological records, and I mean they certainly take bloody long enough. Um, but yeah, no, there's several which were started many years down the line in themselves. Bloody
Mm.
Sunday being one, for example,
Yeah, of course.
um, have come to a conclusion in this era.
Mm,
Um, and then being, sort of come in at the same time as new inquiries are being
mm,
begun. I think
mm,
there's a tendency, like in the 80s, I don't remember there being a lot of inquiries on hand, and I think that's simply because they
mm.
weren't a strategy in the
Right.
same sense, and they became so slightly later
Yeah.
on.
I wonder whether they feed into the narrative that a lot of people have in this country that politicians don't work for them. Whether it feeds into the narrative that's then picked up by the right of politics and utilized to help people like Nigel Farage or whatever. Whether it feeds into that, not in the same way that the immigration stuff does, because that's him utilizing it. But generally speaking, there's just this displeasure at official politics, isn't there?
Hmm.
And we expect whitewashes from inquiries. We're not expecting them to actually lead to anything. We had, oh, I forgot to mention the COVID one, which of course
Oh,
had
yeah.
another tranche
Came and went, didn't it?
reported last a few weeks ago, where they basically told us what we already knew, that Boris Johnson was running a terrible Downing Street operation that was potentially leading to thousands more deaths than it needed to. And where's that gone? Nobody
Yeah.
cares. Is it because we already knew that it was that rubbish? Is it because we expected it to say that? Not a whitewash, that one, is it? It's actually, or is
I
it
think
too hard to
possibly.
do a whitewash on that?
I think also there wasn't much impetus to whitewash
Mm,
it because the key people who would have been defending themselves, Boris Johnson, Liz
mm,
Truss, um, what's his name, Hancock,
yeah,
they've all already been disgraced. So
yeah,
they've lost a lot of the sway that they might have had to make the
mm,
inquiry, less potent.
yeah.
Apparently still going on. That's just the first phase. Thank you.
Yes,
Um,
indeed. Yeah. So the COVID one, I think that was actually phase two, and there's going to be several more. It's going to take another. I think I read somewhere that it might take another 8 years.
yeah, which again, very much on trend. Um, Yeah, I was looking up because one of the
Mm.
things I remember watching when I was a bit younger was Yes Minister,
Oh, I've
and
just gone through the entire series.
oh,
Yeah.
have you? So there's one which stuck in my mind where um, Humphrey Appleby, the civil servant,
Mm,
eminence grise, uh, was talking about inquiries essentially
yes.
and saying, if you want to bury something,
Yeah.
do an inquiry.
I watched that episode yesterday, believe it or not. So this is very pertinent. So it's fresh in my mind. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, yes, Minister, yes, Prime Minister, they're obviously like a half hour kind of nuggets, not sort of the definite kind of conversation you would have in the civil service. I don't think. I was never I was never in the civil service high enough to have meetings with that sort of people, those sort of people regularly.
Yeah,
I couldn't imagine them saying that sort of thing quite so definitively, but I can imagine everybody in the room understanding the hint that that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. It's always interesting because Dominic Cummings was the most recent version of someone who identified the civil service
Mm.
primarily through the lens of Yes Minister in the way
Yeah.
that he saw it,
Yeah.
and then tried to reform them.
Mm.
And instead, I mean, he sort of had a crack at it and
Yeah.
never really got very far.
Yeah.
Um, but he wasn't the only one who'd had a go at it.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
it's very
so,
the civil service, its class background, its
mm,
general intent,
yeah.
and the way in which it interacts with politicians is fairly consistent. I think it has evolved over the years, at least in part because um, neoliberalism has redefined how the state functions. A lot of their power has been gently stripped away,
Is it okay
but the
to
attitude's still there.
is it okay to agree with Liz Truss momentarily? Is that, or is that a risky
Oh, I
thing?
don't know. I have to
On
be
one
dropped out
thing,
of the movement.
on one thing only, when she talks about Treasury orthodoxy and not being able to change things, I
Hmm.
think she might have a point. It
Oh
is
yeah,
incredibly
absolutely.
difficult to come in and do anything radical quite the way she did. I mean, she tried to do everything at once, and obviously her plans were horrific, and she was economically incredibly dangerous. Um,
Well, if you're not
but,
in the centrist cabal
mm,
of politics,
yeah,
I think almost everyone agrees with it on some level or
mm,
another. The far
yeah,
right certainly does.
mm,
Nigel Farage infamously was agreeing with Liz Truss right up to the moment that everything detonated.
yeah.
Um,
Well, just
and
imagine, just imagine a left-wing prime minister or chancellor
yeah, yeah,
trying
yeah. I mean,
to
well, this is
do
this has been
large-scale
one of the
nationalisation.
major anarchist arguments for quite some time, right? Is that like, yeah, the left can get into power, but it's still working within the structure of the state, and the structure of the state is very specifically tailored for, created by, and designed to help the ruling classes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which makes it quite an odd thing that these people like Liz Truss are attacking it in that way, because you'd think it would be on their side if they,
I
uh,
mean, Liz
as
Truss made the
anti-establishment, aren't they?
enormous
These.
error of correctly diagnosing what the ruling class ultimately wants,
Mm,
and but trying to go too far, too fast in
yeah.
implementing it.
Mm,
Um,
interesting idea.
and
Yeah.
she was disciplined by the markets because she was taking a tack that the markets thought was too unstable,
We've
basically.
got a comment of wow. Is that at me agreeing with Liz Truss? Is that what?
It could
I'm
be.
sorry. I didn't mean to cause an incident.
For very different reasons, obviously.
We have strayed from the Spycops inquiry, and I'm sorry
We
about
have. I mean, conversations are quite free to meander a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah,
We'll get them
no, that's
back on
good.
track in a
That's
bit.
good.
Um, there's a Lord. Oh, yes, that was the other. So, our good friend has mentioned that Lord Donahue claimed in the 1990s that Treasury officials collaborated with Washington in the 1970s over the IMF loan to frustrate a socialist government.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, ultimately, if any government is looking to um, effective, it's not just our domestic ruling class that gets involved with that kind of thing. It's every other ruling class as well.
Yes. Yes,
Um,
indeed. Yeah.
the
Absolutely.
internationalism of the ruling class is very effective.
They're
Um,
very good at solidarity. These people, aren't they? Actually, whereas the proletariat has a bit of a problem with with showing solidarity,
yeah,
mutual aid, and comradeship. The
which leads
people.
us very
Okay.
thingy slickly onto the UK pressing to undercut the ECHR.
Oh,
So this is essentially human rights law uh, across Europe, and it is mostly aimed at making life harder for refugees. I think it's probably
yes,
fair to say.
almost
Um,
entirely about that, isn't it? Yeah, this is this is awful, and it plays into the right's hands perfectly, because this is exactly what they want, although they would probably go much further. And in a way, you could see it from a centrist point of view as perhaps this is a way of Keir Starmer and others trying to save the ECHR rather than the whole thing collapsing. But it's gonna destroy people's lives. That's the be all and end all of it. And I was thinking about it tonight before we started, and I was thinking, just imagine a world where European countries in the Council of Europe get together and decide that no, the right is wrong. And freedom of movement, people moving around, particularly to protect themselves, is a fundamentally good thing for humanity. It can't be stopped anyway, considering that we've got wars, we've got climate disaster. It's an inevitability. Why don't we make it a positive thing? Why don't we convince our populations of the benefits of it? Why don't we educate people in a different way about it? And they've chosen not to do that. This is obviously a choice, but the alternative is about peace. It's about openness. It's about dealing with the issues that causes the migration. If you really want to get to grips with it, deal with fossil fuels. If you really want to get to grips with it, try and create a more peaceful world. Instead, what they're going to do is blame the victims, and the victims will end up being persecuted and tortured as a result, and our leaders will be responsible for that. I think it's horrific.
Yeah, no, obviously there's a core logic there of capitalism is in crisis and has been for quite some time. The most notable dip was 2008, but I don't think anybody who reads economics at all um, would be unable to see the general thread that started with emergency measures by Thatcher and has led to our current pass, right?
Mm. Mm.
Um, like the general collapse of Keynesianism as a model, the way in which the imperial methodology of Europe fell apart, was taken over by the US and increasingly by China. The way in which uh, we sort of plateaued on what people needed,
Mm.
and they needed to find a way to continue to filter wealth
Mm.
upwards. All of these things, they've um, created a crisis which is near enough insoluble. I mean,
Mm.
the current thing which is keeping the whole parade float going has been AI. If you take AI out of the American economy, for example, it's been in recession for the last
Mm.
while,
Yeah, yeah,
probably even depression.
yeah.
Um, but AI, if it's successful, deletes huge numbers of jobs
It does.
um, with no apparent method for replacing them.
No.
You can say that automation has been happening for a very long time. You can say that we had outsourcing for many, many years, which moved
Mm.
jobs overseas, um, and jobs were replaced. But actually, you look at kind of uh, the British economy over that time. Yes,
Mm.
London did very well, and the financial sector did very well, but um, you know, the town I live in, most towns outside the Manchester and Edinburgh and London, a few winners, basically, a few
Mm.
big urban centres. Most places have not been doing very well.
Yeah,
And this is all blamed on an influx of
it is.
refugees and asylum seekers and foreigners, because if you say outright, no, this is just capitalism. This is
Mm.
capitalism functioning as you would expect it to.
Yeah.
Wealth filters to the winners of the competition, be those urban centres or individuals. Um, People then move to those urban centres, hence London becoming, as we will move on to in a second, considerably harder pressed for housing and all the rest of it. Um, and yeah, like this build up of economic difficulties for capitalism has
Mm.
to be pushed somewhere. There has
Yeah.
to be a blame that goes somewhere, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the weak. It's
I
basically
like
people who
I
can't
like the
defend
way
themselves.
you got it back to immigration, because I was wondering where this was going off into quite an essay on capitalism. Uh,
Sorry, yeah, my occasional meandering rants.
Yeah, and no, it was good. It all makes sense, and an awful lot of our economy actually now is about us being the product. Social media is entirely about us being the product, in the same way that newspaper advertising used to be us being the product. We were buying a newspaper and we're looking at the adverts, but actually the advertisers were looking to get to us. That's what they used the newspapers to get eyes on their advertising. And so anybody buying a newspaper is the product. Anybody using social media, like YouTube or anything, is actually the product, and that's where an awful lot of the economy is now. Companies advertise, and we look at it basically,
Yeah,
and that's just an astonishing change in the way that we do things. It could be the basis for a future where, if that expands, the AI takes jobs, but there's still money circulating in some way, as long as everybody's got a stake in it. I'm not saying there are opportunities for capitalism here, but there are ways that this will develop that we just don't understand yet.
mm,
And we are going to find ourselves in a place which is very different from the go to work and you've got a straightforward boss. In a sense, we might all be some form of self-employed in that kind of scenario, although a lot of people will still have to do things like service industry jobs and that sort of thing. But we're living in really strange times. Um, or it could be this is the way that this civilization, this capitalist system collapses. Who knows? I've no idea. But the way things are going, it feels unsustainable, doesn't it? The way things are at the moment, and the poverty involved, and the number of people moving around the world because of it, just seems very odd, I feel.
also something which, I mean, sort of going back to the movement of refugees a little bit, is that we talk about a lot of the time, and certainly within kind of the mainstream debate, we talk about external to Europe
Mm,
migration
yeah,
from Africa and East Asia primarily, um, and the ways in which you can create the infamously Fortress Europe, this border along the
mm,
Mediterranean and along the line of Russia, essentially. And it's not really considered that climate change is going to create internal migration at least as heavily over the
mm,
next 30 to 50 years, say.
yeah,
Because what you've also got is places like southern Spain and southern Italy, and Greece, and that whole swathe of southern Europe, which is heating up.
yeah,
And desertification is already happening in parts of Spain, um, and it's only going to get worse.
yeah,
So you're going to end up with people displaced from the south of Europe towards the north of Europe,
yeah. That
uh,
makes sense.
and at that point you're sort of wondering, okay, so um, what's the discussion going to be at that stage? Is it going to be back to, well, we don't want these
Mm,
swarthy Southern Europeans coming to live in our lovely area in northern zones? I suspect something like that.
yeah. So
The
maybe
tone
some
of the
kind of
conversation.
renegotiated Schengen agreement or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Um,
rural of Europe to a smaller zone, maybe.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, anything's possible, isn't it? Yeah, we'll have to see how it develops. I just wanted to think about this ECHR issue because it's been around for a long time. The convention. It's been around since 1950, and it was based on the United Nations Universal Declaration, and so it comes into being as a response to the horrors of Nazism. And Europe picks that up with a specific interest to make sure that never happens again. So we've got that historical basis to it, and any fiddling with it could presumably risk horrors happening again, depending on how far you take it. Because of course, you can change the wording or the meaning of Article 3, which is about inhuman torture, inhuman degrading treatment and torture. But it applies to everyone. It doesn't just apply to people who have crossed borders or traveled in small boats or whatever. It applies to everybody. So there is that element to it. It is a document that applies to everybody's rights. So there's that element to it. There's also the element that the United Nations Convention on Refugees came around, I think, 1951. 25 years ago, back in the midst of time, I used to interview asylum seekers at the Home Office. So I had to do it to those United Nations documents. And, it was just fairly straightforward that if there was a hint that somebody could be tortured if they were returned to their country of origin, then they would not be going there. Britain would not send them back. And that's what we were trained to make sure we were looking out for. Lots of problems with it as well, because, we were told that, the United Nations rules told us that we should interview an asylum seeker so that we understand their life story and why they've come here. And the Home Office at the time was encouraging us to do interviews in 20 minutes, which doesn't really give you much time to understand why someone's spent an awful lot of their time and risked their life to get here. I can understand the argument that document from 1951, which was primarily drawn up to deal with the amount of displaced people around the world after the Second World War, I can understand why some people could argue that document needs updating. However, with the amount of people being dispersed now, it might actually need to be updated in a more positive direction than negatively in the way that the right wants it to. But it's certainly been around since the 1950s and was set up specifically to deal with the aftermath of the Second World War. So we have to bear that in mind. And I can understand people saying, well, we need to tweak that. Do we need to tweak it in a rightwards direction? I don't think so.
Yeah, it is an interesting one that you have a body of law set up to deal with mass movements of people across every part of Europe, which is now considered, too nice for movements into Europe. Which are not in many ways are less disruptive, I suppose.
Yeah, and also, often mentioned but not discussed enough is the lack of legal ways for people to arrive into this country. Back when I was involved with Home Office work, people were generally coming in illegally in the backs of lorries and could end up anywhere in the country, depending on when they realize they've actually made it to Britain. But now people don't come in the back of lorries because detection is too high. So people that's why the small boats are happening. Create a legal route for people to come here. But then, of course, that wouldn't satisfy the right, would it?
No. Because they're not interested in people coming over at all.
No.
Which is a hopeless ambition on their part, unless they're prepared to literally stand on Dover, shooting people as they arrive.
This is the crazy thing, isn't it? People have been crossing the channel in small boats for how long? How long has this been going on? Since human beings existed? I don't know. Since they reached the shores of
ever since Doggerland sank into the sea and people couldn't walk it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they will forever be coming across the channel on small boats. It's never going to stop. You have to work out a different approach, really. If you think that the boats can be stopped, how is that going to happen?
Don't put ideas on a postcard because we don't want to give them any more.
No, indeed.
All right, so moving on to Shelter, which has warned that 1 in 20 people are now homeless in parts of London, with the worst affected being Newham with 1 in 18, 1 in 21 in Westminster, and 1 in 26 in Lambeth who are homeless. 382,618 people are estimated to have nowhere permanent to live in England, an annual increase of 8%, which is not in itself insignificant. And obviously, when it comes to homelessness, estimates are a really difficult game because an awful lot of people simply don't declare themselves to be homeless because they're sleeping on someone's sofa or, you know, in between houses at some time or another and just don't register
Yeah. What do you want me to say about that? I mean,
it.
I was going to be glib and say, don't worry, Rachel Reeves' budget's going to kick in soon. But
Yeah.
it,
Uh,
it
it's
oh, it's
uh,
just awful.
like obviously these things are related in terms of the right's reaction to them, right? So the right wing will say there is a massive shortage of housing, and the reason there is a massive shortage of housing is because of all these refugees and migrants, etc., etc., etc. And the obvious rejoinder to this is, well, first of all, um, the shortage of housing is no such thing. There are more empty houses in England than there are homeless people. Many of them are not in great shape, sure, and many of them are being held empty for good reason. But um, the vast majority of the housing crisis in this country could be solved tomorrow by a government that was prepared to tell landlords, we're taking this house that you're not using and we're putting someone in it. Um, but that's not going to happen. It's not obviously it's not going to happen because governments are um, far too invested in social, in economic stability in the form of not panicking the markets, etc., etc. Many of them are landlords themselves, and they ultimately serve the ruling class, and therefore, and the ruling class is what owns all of these
I
buildings. Um,
wonder how many rooms there are in Buckingham Palace. That's in West End.
well, quite.
Anyway, um,
But the other issue is that one of the things about capitalist economy, right, is that um, people have to move where the jobs are because capitalism
mm,
demands this of us, right?
mm,
Like capitalism doesn't come to us with jobs.
no,
It says to us, you have to move here where I have my factory
yeah,
or my office or wherever. Um, and these companies, in vast majority, want certain things, certain economic things. They want an economic hub where they can set up and have easy access to all the labor that they want, um, which is usually a big city. They want decent transport links to that hub so they can get people in and out. Um, they want solid commercial surroundings. And because they're CEOs and all the rest of it, they probably want access to some luxury goods as well that they can buy on their lunch break.
mm,
Which means they all go to places like Cambridge and London and Manchester and Edinburgh and Glasgow and the big cities which have a lot going for them already. And because of that, all the jobs are in those places, which means that we all have to move to those places to get the jobs. And of course, that then means that in London, particularly, there is a housing crisis
yeah. But
because
that's what they
everybody
call
needs to
freedom.
move to London for the
They call it
jobs which are
freedom.
asking us to work.
Yeah.
Um,
So I was just saying they call that freedom.
yes, they
It's
call
not
this
what we
freedom,
call freedom,
absolutely.
is it really? There is something similar about housing policy and immigration policy in one respect as well, something that you've not mentioned, and that is that successive governments have said, we're going to solve this. Normally, when in the case of housing, by building houses, like you've talked about, and then failing to build houses. And this kind of really is a pattern that began with Thatcher, with the selling off of council houses, but not the replacement of them. You sell them off, but there's no plan to actually build any more, and that's one of the reasons why we've got to where we are. But the housing market is just insane as well, isn't it? House prices are absolutely crazy, and a lot of people in the post-war period really benefited from that period of a wonderful or a better welfare state, the emerging health service at its peak, and better jobs. I mean, didn't quite work out all the way through that post-war period, but a lot of people who were able to get on the property ladder then have been able to get onto the property ladder several times. And I think generation after that has found it much harder, and subsequent generations are going to find it even harder. I do feel as though you hear the argument from the right on immigration, which is we've got too many people. And then you go outside of a big city and you see all this amazing green land that could be utilized for housing. I'm not saying that we should destroy
But
our
also,
habitat, but
there's
you know what I mean?
there is a very so one of the things which you get, and this is not just Britain, this is basically all over. I mean, basically everywhere, certainly across the entire West, is that because we now have a combination of stagnating slash declining population numbers, and we have the rapid urbanization process that's been ongoing, you know, for most of, well, most of the last couple of centuries, right? In particular, it's been at its most rapid. Um, we have all of these people kind of funneled into the big cities or county towns at least, and you have a hollowing out of the countryside in general.
Mm,
Like there's, famously in Italy, you have entire villages which are essentially abandoned because all of the young people have moved to the cities because that's where there is work, and all of the older people are stranded in these relatively small areas with actually nobody to look after them. Like I can, there's elderly people I know who live in those kinds of villages
mm,
and this could be in relatively wealthy counties as well. We're not just talking about the left behind counties in the north,
yeah.
um, but the south. It happens in the south as well. And you, whenever anyone talks about Britain being um, overcrowded, it's like, well, in the big cities where most of the complainants are not, I will note,
Mm,
then yes, you could make an argument for it being very crowded. But
yeah.
there's reasons for that which are based in economies, not in whether any refugees happen to be coming
Yeah,
over.
indeed. But it works as an argument. People take it in. People accept it.
Because it's
People,
simple. It's
yeah,
simple, and in theory, it's solvable. Because if
yeah,
you close the borders, then and nobody else comes in,
yeah,
uh, then you don't have a worsening crisis.
yeah, absolutely.
Much easier to
Mm,
come up with that solution than it is to say, well, actually, this is a key, core, and insoluble part of
yeah,
modern capitalism.
yeah. It also works in areas where most people, like the vast majority of people, are white as well. It works in those areas because they haven't had the benefits of living with amongst other people and having that kind of community spirit. Um, and I think that plays into also the effect of the 1980s and the individualism that Thatcherism supported and promoted. There are, I'm thinking back to where I grew up. I grew up a few miles away from RAF Scampton, which the previous government earmarked as a place to house refugees. And indeed, they started building the facilities for it. And I know of someone rather in the village that I grew up in whose son said, don't go walking down this particular area just in case the migrants come and get you. It's that sort of fear which has no basis. Nobody even arrived yet.
This is a story. This is a story which came out
Crazy.
today on in the Guardian, which is Crowborough, uh, identical to what you're describing.
Mm.
They've set up vigilante crews
Mm.
wandering around patrolling. Hasn't even got any migrants in it. Like,
This
what are
is
you
exhausting,
doing?
isn't it?
There's no one at the camp. Why are you patrolling the streets
Is
just in
it
case these migrants show up? It's
Crowborough?
crazy.
Where's is that in Sussex? Is that
Yes, it is in
that
Sussex.
Crowborough? I'm fairly sure is the place where people the main characters in Day of the Triffids end up going to make their life again. Very
That
anarchist
reference.
as well. Very anarchist. They leave London. London's desolate, it's awful, it's falling apart, and they find a farmhouse, I think in Crowborough, and they just go back to the land and start living a nice simple life again, which
Mm.
is so anarchist in its storytelling. It's wonderful. It is.
Yeah.
I find it wonderful.
I mean, yes, but apparently Krober proper is not living up to the hype.
Shame.
Um, maybe we could put on a film showing around there or something, just a little reminder. Anyway, yeah, no, it's. I think the other thing with housing, of course, is that um, the with the successive, like the whole thing you were talking about with council housing and the fact that the government doesn't do it anymore. Um, Although I think some moves towards building more have been going on. Uh, part of the issue, of course, is that if you're a developer, so if you're a government, building council housing is fairly straightforward, right? You build the house, you get the rent for the house, you look after the house, and eventually it pays itself back, and you end up making a little bit of extra money on it. The downside, of course, being that you have to actively maintain all this stuff. You become responsible for it. People complain about it, etc., etc. So you like the idea of offsetting it to the private sector because you no longer have to get told off by people in town hall meetings. Um, but the problem is that with developers, they don't like their primary thing is not build a place, eventually pay it back and make a modest but reasonable income.
Mm,
Their thing is buy land, build houses as cheaply and pack them all in as
mm,
possible, and then
mm.
sell to a private market which is desperate for housing.
Yeah,
That's the model because
yeah.
that's what makes you the most profit. It is not in their interests to build vast numbers of houses or indeed to have enough people knowing how to build houses,
Mm,
which is another thing, which is, the training
absolutely.
systems which
Yeah,
have
yeah.
produced construction workers in the past have also disappeared because they are wildly under-resourced by the development
Mm,
firm, construction firms that would supposedly benefit from them. But if you've got a captive audience and you're just feeding a trickle of houses
yeah,
towards them. You're maximizing your profit all the time. And these
absolutely.
companies have land banks, vast tracts, which they're basically just denying to anyone else to build anything on. But they're just going to do it at their own pace to
Yeah.
make as much money as possible. Now, if you want to talk about getting rid of or undercutting the lack of house building, the crisis in that sector, you've got to start with depowering and probably breaking up and destroying the development companies that have this strategy.
So,
These companies are considered as the only ones who can do the job. They're the ones who hire all the construction workers. They're the ones who build all the buildings. But it's not a coincidence.
no. So just imagine the Labour government setting up a nationalised company to build uh, houses. What would that do
It,
to the
it would set the cat among the pigeons, I've no doubt. I can't see them doing it. It's also,
market?
I mean, one of the things, obviously, from an anarchist perspective, that we can say is that it's always important to remember that council housing had its own flaws,
Oh,
right?
of
Like
course.
people who
Yeah.
lived in council housing quite often will have pretty terrible stories about the quality of the maintenance, the way in which councils would do dumping of problematic people into one place and create
Yeah.
these, cop encircled ghettos of people who
Mm.
then had no method of escaping, and all these other things which happened with council housing. That's all reasonable critiques of why governments are not perfect or even great a lot of the time.
Yeah, indeed. I mean,
Um,
also at the same time, we can also say that we might well be against the state. That doesn't mean that we think that the state always does things that are bad. Occasionally, the state helps people.
and certainly within capitalism, like there is, it's the old cop thing, right? Is that the state specifically gives police certain roles
Mm,
which make them indispensable to the general public.
yeah.
So, I don't know, if you've got your next door neighbor is a violent thug, it's and is beating up his partner, and you can hear him doing so.
Yes.
Um, and it's just you living next to them, and you're an alienated part of society, etc.,
Mm.
etc. What are your options? Well, I'm never going to blame someone for calling a cop under those
Yeah.
circumstances. And they rely
Same
on
if you,
that.
the same if you're being attacked in the street. You would
Sure.
call for, you'd want help from anyone.
Yeah. And they rely on that indispensability to
Yeah.
forgive the rest of what policing is, right?
That's a good way of
Um,
describing it. Yeah, absolutely. Just thinking about migration as well. You mentioned people not being trained up to build. There's a whole load of people who could come over who have
Absolutely.
those
Yeah, yeah.
skills and experiences. And also, we should bear in mind, even though we're talking about this housing crisis, and you very eloquently talked about how there's lots of housing that is available, really, or should be made available. We're also facing the prospect of a shrinking population in the next few decades. And shrinking populations have all of those problems that you described in those rural communities which have been hollowed out. And you think about some of those mining communities where the hollowing out was basically the destruction of an entire way of work, and therefore the community doesn't exist anymore that was literally built around it. We are going to have in the next few decades, if the population does shrink, we're going to have the obvious necessity to close down schools, hospitals, and other public services unless we get more people in, right? So how does economic growth happen if your population is shrinking? That's quite tricky as well.
We have a few comments come in.
Oh wow, goodness.
So land banking is villainous, very true. Um, isn't that story where a young one says, "Don't go down that lane because of migrants"? A rehash of the stories decades ago. Don't go down the lane because mental hospital and fear of the alien. I mean, yeah, like
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
they're all manifestations of the same basic project of the other is scary. So um,
Absolutely.
uh, only helps because of external pressure. Hence, the lack of it at the moment hinders at best. Yeah. I'm not sure about the ugly laws, but I'll take your word for it. Building more houses is a market solution, though there are already empty houses and buildings. Yes, absolutely. And it's one of the things is that the focus on institutionalized methods of building. Um,
Mm,
like we've mentioned a couple of times, Colin Ward and the self-build movement on this show,
mm,
and yeah, like one thing which is consistently taken away from us as populations is the ability to envision, enact our own housing, right?
yeah.
Like the repurposing of empty buildings is something which, in theory, any community should be able to do,
Mm,
right? Like
mm,
it's not impossible to
yeah.
make a house nice again. Most of us have
Yeah.
had to crack at it at some time in our lives. Um, but we are, there's so many hoops and bits of red tape which are put in front of us, which primarily help constructors to keep the whole thing in a rarefied air,
Yeah.
um, rather than enabling actual building to happen. Um,
Well, yeah. I mean, if you rely on the market, then you're only going to get things that people can make a profit out,
hmm. I mean, I
rather
was I
than
was actually
nice
trying
things.
to, so I was doing something to my own place last year, which was a relatively small job. It was taking out a chimney breast, um, so to make the room a bit bigger. And you had to call building control to get sign off on it, which actually reasonable. If you're taking down a chimney, it can
Mm,
pull other stuff down. You want to make sure
mm,
that the bracket is proper and all the rest of it. Um, but the cost of building control alone was 450 quid just to say yes, these plans are fine, go ahead.
mm,
Um, the interesting thing I thought was that so they've stripped back the officialdom in the local councils because they can't afford to pay people. So what used to be an 8-person department in building control in my borough um, is now one and a half, one full-timer, one
mm,
part-timer. And they get the same, if not more, number of people writing in to say, I'm doing this to my house. Is it okay? And as a result, as you might imagine, they still charge the money, but the actual checks are almost zero. right? Like they just you send them a bunch of photos, they look at the photos and they say, "Yep, that's fine,"
Yeah,
and that's it.
streamlined.
And they used to go out and check. The whole point was that they went out and checked that the whole thing was sound
Yeah,
and ready to go.
yeah,
But what you've got now is the state has withdrawn the safety factor, but
mm,
kept the charge,
yeah,
which
yeah,
which means that the only people who do all these works, who are and these are small works, but if you're doing it on a much larger basis, you're having to do much grander scale of building control work and all the rest of it. Um, the only people who can afford it are big constructors, but they
mm,
are no longer being properly looked at. So the
yeah.
quality of the buildings inevitably is actually going to fall. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if new builds in the future. I mean, you already hear plenty of tales of new builds being really rubbish quality, right? But it wouldn't surprise me at all if it started getting seriously dangerous, because you're making it so that people have no say in their buildings, no ability to make sure that the quality is decent at the early stage, and you're just handing it over to contractors who are going to do the cheapest, shoddiest job possible.
Can I
You know,
come back to
absolute
homelessness?
worst of all systems.
Can I come back to homelessness?
Yes,
Because that's the bit we're talking about. But we did go off on a tangent, which was good.
that was related.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I was just thinking though, those figures are astonishing. The I just wonder at what stage it becomes so obvious that government has to do something. Government is always slow, isn't it, when it needs to do something. Once it starts doing something, it's incredibly difficult to stop.
Hmm.
I was thinking about this in relation to like COVID and the mutual aid groups that started up because the state wasn't doing anything. And then the moment the state starts to do anything, it becomes hard to keep the mutual aid groups going because there's services and stuff that people might be benefiting from. I know there's other issues to do with the mutual aid groups which uh, weren't easy to manage as well. But I just wonder, that's an awful lot of people in our society, and we were talking about it just before we came on air about how a lot of that will be masked because people aren't necessarily living on the streets. They'll be living with family, or they'll be put into shelter, some kind of accommodation, or whatever. At some point, that something's got to give. It just feels like a crazy percentage of people.
Yep. Um,
Okay.
no, no. I mean,
I thought you
there's not
might
a lot I
argue
can
that.
add in terms of.
No, no, that's fine. That's
It's
fine.
just yes, it is. It is a really horrible situation,
It's
and
awful,
it
awful for
doesn't
so
seem
many
to
people.
be certainly the government as is, and I don't really see many radical ideas coming out of the other parties either, obviously,
And
to fix it.
and I imagine that because we live such individualized lives, that people won't necessarily know anybody else in that situation, perhaps. It makes it hard for struggle to be collectivized. Um, you've got the charities coming in and collectivizing it, but that's not the same as the people getting together and being able to do something for themselves about it.
Mm.
At some point, there's going to be a desperate situation. I feel if it
I
gets
mean, I
much
think
more.
I think it's already into desperate territory. It's just
Yeah,
how far you go before you get into socially unstable territory, I suppose.
that's kind of what I mean. Yeah, and I also feel like so many. I mean, it could happen to pretty much anyone, couldn't it? Unless you're really rich, it's just terrifying as well.
Aye. So we have a couple more notes. Local government has laws on the books to compulsory purchase empty homes, which is rarely if ever used. Very true. Um, while aiming to replace most people's jobs with LLMs or AI. Yeah, I mean, if LLMs do any of what they promise to do, then an awful lot of what we're talking about now becomes kind of irrelevant because in a situation where nobody has any jobs or income,
Mm.
who the hell is paying all the rent? Um,
Yeah, indeed.
but so which moves us on. So we've got a couple of we move on to our two freedom stories, picks of the week, which is camping in Germany, which is analysis of Rhinemetall and Waffen, protest camp against Germany's largest arms manufacturer and remilitarization generally, getting hijacked by authoritarian red groups. It's a good article. It's by Christina Sykes, and it's the sort of analysis which I think is often worth kind of at least the reiteration, because we go through
Mm,
periods of more or less authoritarian leanings in things like protest camps.
mm,
Um, and yeah, I would say one of the successes of the anarchist movement in the 80s and 90s in particular was the establishment of a norm in protest camps of
mm.
de-hierarchized spaces, I
Yeah.
suppose. Yeah, sort of. I did used to laugh a little bit at some of the jazz hands. If you agree, it's like the
Oh yeah.
nod does exist, um, but but it was very well organized back in the day, and I think the falling away of protest camps in recent years has tended to lead to, you know, you end up with having to reinvent the wheel a little bit. I think you have camps spring up again, and Leninists want to do their usual thing of structuring the camp around what they want, i.e., party priorities.
Yeah.
And in this case, it sounds like it became problematic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I read it and felt similar kind of vibes about it. That it's the same old story, really. That this is what many left groups do. They seek to take over and they seek to create a hierarchy. And the alternative to that is an anarchist way of doing things. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we went through a phase where we thought the 21st century might be the anarchist century, and the fact that
Good old days.
non-hierarchical movements were the norm in protest groups, weren't they? We went through a period in the early 21st century where it was expected for activism to be non-hierarchical, for example. Um, and I think the message that we have still has to be the same, basically, that an anarchist way of doing things, right? Okay, so there'll be some anarchists who hope and think that there will be some kind of revolutionary moment, and perhaps lead to some kind of anarchist society, whatever that means. I would say that even if we reach that point in the future, which I'm not sure we will, but if we did meet that point, what we can do now is still the same as what we would do if we met that point, which is that we organize our groups non-hierarchically. We organize our groups in a way that allows everybody to have a say in the matters that affect them, because that's the sort of society that we want. And so our ends and means match, basically.
The old
Um,
prefigurative politics.
yeah. Well, I think it's the only way we can behave. Marxists might find this tricky, but you can't live your life as a communist. But we can live our lives as an anarchist, as anarchists. We can live our lives right now as anarchists without having the perfect society. Communists are going to struggle doing that because they don't have a communist society. We might say we haven't got an anarchist society, but the method is the same. And so when we come across things like this, and of course, mutual aid groups suffered from it as well. The Occupy movement suffered from people trying to do it. We have to have an environment where we can speak up and have that sort of, I would describe it as a continuous revolution, that we are continually challenging people that take authority when they don't deserve it.
It's
And
I think we often underestimate our impact because obviously our everyday efforts are very small a lot of the time, right?
yes,
Um, we involve ourselves in little community groups here and there, and maybe we'll have like a little radical group which does a like a book club or a film night thing or whatever, and we show up at protests and all this kind of stuff.
or this,
Um,
we spout on YouTube for
or,
over an hour.
or, or just do this kind of thing, yeah. Um, but the one of the things which I think will often manifest, and it's not just in kind of the big set twos, the big camps or the big protests or whatever, is that there is a certain level at which our critique has sunk in. You'll quite often see people organizing on a non-hierarchical basis as a matter of,
Mm,
oh, well, we obviously we don't want some um, big theorists sort of swanning in and
mm,
running things for us. We want to do it ourselves.
mm.
Um, and I think that's something which, yeah, like the continual bashing away that we do does have an impact on that kind of basis. People quite often do things not necessarily having ever met an anarchist, but in anarchistic ways.
But that's
Um,
exactly right. And you don't need to be an anarchist to want to have a say in the things that affect you. And that, I think, is the strongest overall message of anarchism. We're not trying to convert people to become anarchists, I don't think. Some people might think they are, but we're not a political party. We're not trying to sell papers. Yes, we are when Freedom Print Edition comes out, but we're not trying to get.
Free, it's a freebie. We give them away.
Oh,
There
you
is,
know,
although that speaking of that, we do have a new paper out. I will try and remember to put it up in the shop. Um,
but you know what I mean. We're not. I don't think anarchism requires, because some people criticize when I talk to people who aren't anarchists, they'll say, oh, but that requires everybody to think the same. No, it doesn't. Anarchism is about the fact that people don't think the same. It's about being able to give everybody the chance to have an impact on the things that affect them. So people don't have to be anarchists. We just need to get out there the method, which is a kind of direct democracy, basically. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the obvious things that that means to us. It means that we are anti-capitalist. It means, all sorts of stuff like that. For some people, it will mean that we're revolutionary, and so on and so forth. And so the moment someone doesn't say the right thing or they're not on message, you think, oh, right, okay, well, there's going to be a big row, and all of that sort of stuff comes. But on a very basic level, people don't have to all agree with us. We just need to introduce them to the idea that the space we've created is that they're part of it. That basically the space itself facilitates the ability for everybody to be involved. And when you introduce people to that sort of politics, whether it's in a small group or a wider movement, people don't generally want to go back to being told what to do. So it's kind of like infectious. People want it. It requires people to be understanding, and it requires people to have the knowledge. And it's also experiential. The more you do it, the better you are at it. So some people will be nervous to begin with. And so, we need to create that sort of environment where people can feel comfortable with it, and also that they get something out of it, and then they'll never leave it behind.
very, very, very good. Um,
Thank you.
only thing I would add to that is it would be nice to have a bit more structure and infrastructure to leapfrog off when the need arises. Um,
That requires more people getting it. Maybe we do need more anarchists then to get that infrastructure in place. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I would certainly say
Mm.
that. I mean, more resources is always nice, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
All right,
And
as we are
millions of pounds.
yes, Mr. Pan. Right, so as we are getting on for time, we are in
Oh, we
fact.
are.
Um, I'll rattle through the protests in Bulgaria was the second freedom story, which was massive protests in Sofia and other Bulgarian cities against the ruling coalition's budget plans, forced the government to backtrack on a bill that would have increased individual contributions to pensions and social security programs, by Camila Marquez. Yeah, it's just a really good summary. I would suggest going and having a read of it. And we have a in absentia update from Andy Minker about the
Mm.
Filton 24, saying not much to update on the trial. We are moving on to the fifth defendant's evidence today, which would have been today. However, this is the first case I've heard of where a defendant admits sitting in a churchyard listening to the birds and squirrels before allegedly committing violent disorder, aggravated burglary, and GBH with intent.
Mm.
So that's your stories of the week. Um, And I think we're all pretty much done for Christmas. Everyone have a great time doing as little as humanly possible and stuffing yourselves with whatever you're most. Thank you very much, John, for a
Thank
fantastic
you.
bit of
I
conversation.
will I will try and do this more regularly, work permitting, but as a tutor of A-level students, they tend to want lessons in the evening. So it does depend on that. But Thursdays are pretty free at the moment, just as you break for Christmas.
Excellent. Cool. Well, hopefully, you're inundated with work other than on Thursdays.
Please, someone get the rich some money for a tutor, and then I can start having some work. It's been so hard, so hard. Oh well, rent day next week.
Well, thank you very much, and
Thank you. It's been
Christmas.
fun.
Speak to you again in the new year.